Pickle, it's funny. A little bit earlier, you were saying how cold it is here in the studio.
It has been.
I don't know about you.
It's warming up a little bit.
It's starting to feel pretty hot. Yeah, Hot Take Tuesday. Excuse me, with our good friend, Greg Powers of Next Level Athlete. Each week we ask a member of the Dave Campbell's Texas Football crew to come up with their hottest take, to issue it on TexasFootball.com, and then come on this very show and defend it. And up on TexasFootball.com, you will find Greg Powers' new piece that says, Texas colleges produce better NFL talent on defense instead of offense. Powers, first and foremost, it's good to see you.
Hey, thanks for having me, as always.
So I want to dive into your piece up here on TexasFootball.com about the defense versus the offense, because I think people look at the NFL right now and they see Pat Mahomes and they see Kyler Murray and they see Baker Mayfield, and they're thinking, boy, Texas sure has a knack for putting out a lot of offensive talent. You're kind of taking the other side of it, and you're saying that if you really want to make the NFL right now and be a big-time player in the NFL coming from the state of Texas, you're better off being on the defensive side.
In a way, I'm saying Texas colleges produce more defensive talents, which is an interesting way to look at it, because you named three very good quarterbacks there who left the state of Texas and didn't play their college ball in state. Kyler Murray comes with a bit of a disclaimer. I mean, he did start his career out at Texas A&M. Baker Mayfield as well started his career out at Texas Tech. But Jalen Hurts went to Alabama and then transferred to Oklahoma. There's some really good quarterbacks who come from the Lone Star State. But an interesting thing that I found out when doing research for this to make this point is that a Texas college hasn't produced an NFL draft pick in the last 3 years. So that was really surprising to me, considering the amount of talent that the Texas high school football programs do pump out at that position. So that, and another interesting thing to me too is, we have a lot of great wide receivers year over year in Texas high school football. The highest draft pick in the last 3 years was Jalen Rager at 21 from TCU, and that's the highest offensive draft pick in the last 3 years. If you're a great defensive lineman, you have a better chance of getting drafted high, and Ed Oliver and LJ Collier can attest to that, as they are the two highest draft picks that have come from Lone Star State College in the past 3 seasons.
Well, and you add in a guy like Marcus Davenport there at UTSA. Ross Blacklock, also from TCU. I would even say, I'd even zoom out a little bit more, and I'd say that what Texas has done a great job of producing for the NFL isn't just defenders, and you make the point on TexasFootball.com that 60% of the NFL draft picks in the past 3 drafts have come from the defensive side, but also you take a look, especially at the kind of the first 70 some odd picks. It's a lot of front seven. It's not you've got a couple safeties in there. You got guys like Brandon Jones and Jeff Gladney at the cornerback spot. But really, where Texas is making its hay is up front and in that linebacker core, and that seems to be the real kind of connective tissue behind what these drafts have looked like coming from the state of Texas.
I agree 100%. And you said the number 60%. Out of the 54 positional draft picks in the last 3 classes, 60% of them have come on the defensive side of the football. And when you look at that statistics, it's kind of telling, because I did a little bit of a deeper dive. 51% of all drafted players were defensive players to 49% on offense. So there was a slight skew to the defensive side of the football there, but not something that's so alarming to say, oh, well, more defensive players just get picked, and that's why. And to me, it was surprising, because I don't think of the colleges. TCU is kind of you get a disclaimer with TCU because Gary Patterson knows how to develop defensive talent, and they, by and large, have sent some pretty good players into the league on the defensive side of the football. But if I look at all the rest of the college programs, I think of it as more of an offensive state. And I look at our game as more offense biased as I watch high school games and college games. And there's a lot of attention in the national media. Can these guys even play defense? And maybe that needs to come now with the disclaimer that they can play defense, but they can also put up a lot of points. So, I mean, it's a weird thing to look at. I just didn't expect the numbers to skew so heavily to the defensive side.
Well, and one last question for Greg Powers here on Hot Take Tuesday here on Texas Football Today is, I guess, why? Why do you think this is? Is it just a matter of colleges in the state of Texas do a better job of developing defensive talent than they do offensive talent? Is it just as simple as that?
Well, I mean, there's an interesting case, I think, to be made here for talent development, especially at a school like TCU, which has put, out of the 10 names that I listed that were the top 10 highest picks, they put 4 of those names in. Then you have Ed Oliver, who's a one-off freak, but Marcus Davenport, he was a guy who I think came out of basically nowhere. Jordan Brooks, Texas Tech, a guy who was the fourth highest pick on the list completely, but the third highest defensive pick on the list from Texas Tech. He was a really good high school player, but I don't think a lot of people expected him to go in the first round necessarily when the NFL draft came around, especially when he was leaving high school. So, yeah, I do think there was a lot of talent development here, and I think about 50-50 out of those top 10 guys, about 50% of them were 4 or 5 stars, at the top of the list, and the rest were guys who were developed as 3-star talents who had the pedigree or the intangibles to turn themselves into top-tier picks. And that doesn't, I don't think, really carry over to the offensive side of the ball. As I looked at the bigger list, a lot of the top offensive guys were major stars coming out of high school. So it's just an interesting case to be made about talent development and where that talent is coming from. It's easy to see that TCU does a great job, but Texas Tech, Texas A&M, Texas, UTSA, the rest of the list was split up. There was no other school that had 2 lists on here in the top 10 guys. So outside of TCU, I mean, I guess the chances are much greater that you could get drafted from any of the programs as long as you are developed in the correct way.
He's Greg Powers of Next Level Athlete, and he'll be back here tomorrow. So if you just need more Greg Powers in your life, great news. He'll be back tomorrow for This Week in Recruiting. Powers, appreciate your time. Appreciate your piece on TexasFootball.com.
Thanks for having me.
There he goes, Greg Powers of Next Level Athlete. Join us here for Hot Take Tuesday. It's an interesting kind of dive into the data that I think, we get so enamored with the offensive guys and with the Jalen Ragers and especially, I would say, especially on the offensive side, especially the offensive linemen, right? With the Will Hernandezes and the Eric McCoys and the Connor Williamses and the Josh Joneses, et cetera, that maybe we're overlooking the fact that, this is a state that does a pretty good job of putting out some quality defenders as well, perhaps more so than the offensive side.
Well, I also, as we were talking about it, it sprung into mind, if you think about some of the really good Texas high school football players that end up going to in-state colleges, a lot of them, they're the it guy on the team, so they're playing offense, they're playing defense, they're doing all this stuff. In high school, they don't really have time to specialize, but by the time they get to college, they end up being, we're going to keep you just on the defensive line. We're going to keep you just at linebacker or just in the secondary. And then they get that time to really specialize, and they were already such a stud athlete that it feels like that trajectory is able to happen a lot more on that side of the ball when they can go to college and specifically focus on the defensive side of the ball rather than being the it guy in high school.
Most certainly. So very interesting to see, and appreciate Greg Powers for joining us here on Texas Football Today.